All right, beautiful. Welcome, beautiful people. Welcome to all those who are watching the recording back as well. My name is Jamari, and I just invite everybody to take a moment to bring yourself to presence here, wherever you might be coming from, whatever you might be holding in this moment. Just invite you to bring yourself before the presence of Spirit, God, the Creator, the ancestors, whatever it is that you pray to. Taking a couple deep breaths here and gathering all of yourself back to this place, calling all parts of yourself from conversations or meetings or crying babies or whatever it might be in your world, and calling those parts back to yourself as they settle fully here. And as always at Sons of Spirit, offer up a prayer to open up the space. So invite you into this prayer with me. If prayer is not a part of your practice, invite you into continued presence and just well affirmation for our time here together. Great beloved Spirit, divine God, loving ancestors, we invite you all into this space to hold and to nurture this container, to lift up all of the hearts, the souls, the minds who are present here in this moment and that will be present later on. We invite you to offer to them your wisdom. Allow them to hear your voice in the words that are spoken. Allow them to open up their hearts to receive what it is that they intend to receive here. You know better than we do what is meant for them. And so we just trust that you will bring forward all that is necessary for their healing, for their growth, for their transformation. Let all those who are in their lives also be impacted by this time and the healing and wisdom here. May everything that's present ripple out into their lives and just touch with divine glory and anointing all of your love, all of your mercy, all of your grace, and all of your compassion. We lift up every single brother, ones that are here, ones that are listening, and those who are out in our world, hungry and thirsty to hear a word from you. May they be touched by somebody in a meaningful way and their hearts be held in love as they move through the darkest parts of their life at this moment. Amen and Ashe. All right. Thank you, beautiful people. My name is Jamari Michael White, and I am the founder and spiritual director of Sons of Spirit. We are the nation's first spiritual health and healing center for Black men. And our commitment really is to the souls, nurturing the souls of Black men, as well as providing the necessary Black spiritual and ancestral wisdom and reclaiming that in order to support our community collectively as spiritual beings and support the soul and liberation of Black communities. So I'm really grateful for those of you who are here and those of you who are watching the recording back, that you're here at Darkest Night of the Soul. I have an older brother. He is 5, 6 years older than me. And growing up, when we would get ready for getting up for school and going off to school, my mother, how she would wake me up is she would open up the door to my room and let the light from the TV in her room into my room, and it would awaken me. So I was a very light sleeper. She didn't need to say my name. She didn't need to touch me. She would just open up the door, the light would come in, and I would awaken. My brother, on the other hand, slept like he was dead to the world. So oftentimes, and this was back in the day when we didn't have our fancy phones that would cut off the alarms on their own. So he'd use a real clock alarm, and oftentimes his clock alarm would go off for an hour, and he still would not wake up. Often you could say his name, he would not wake up. Often, in order for him to wake up, you would literally have to go and shake his body. Like his body, the bed would have to quake for him to wake up. And I share this because some of our brothers' souls as Black men are light sleepers. Some of us are dead to the world. And so as we move through our time together and think about what does it mean to be in a state of darkness, whatever that looks like in our consciousness, and what does it mean to awaken from that and to heal from that? I want us to take the heat and the judgment and the ego out of where we are and how dark our experiences might look and be, right? It is not anything that I did or he did that made me a light sleeper and made him a heavy one. There's not anything that any person does that makes them extremely troubled at a soul level or less troubled at a soul level. And so you aren't further along in your growth and your awareness because you wake up sooner or easier or better than others. And our brothers who are struggling at a deeper level are not necessarily further behind or less than as well. I always like to say that if you and your brother are in a coma and you happen to awake before he does, do you go and criticize him and yell at him and say, wake up faster, and what are you doing? And why are you still in a coma? Or do you go and you sit by his bedside and you speak life into his consciousness because you know that he can hear you? Do you pray over him? Do you pray for him? Because the fact that he is asleep, the fact that he's in a coma, is a byproduct of life and a byproduct of spirit and a byproduct of being human beings with spiritual consciousness. But how you, how I, how we collectively respond to our brothers who are asleep is our conscious choice. And how we respond reflects so much more on how awakened we actually are than how quickly we got to our own healing and awakening. So I trust that, and I know that everyone who's here and everyone who will watch the recording later are here because you all are the kind of people who, at a soul level, understand that healing is both an individual and a collective endeavor. That when I heal, you heal. When he heals, she heals. When they heal, we heal. And so I thank you for showing up with an open heart that desires to know, how do we support each other better? How do we support Black men better? How do we support ourselves better when we're going through the darkest nights of our lives? So I thank you all for being here and showing up, and trust that this will be a beautiful time for us all to learn and grow together. Welcome, folks. If you want to put in the chat who you are and where you're from, you can. And if there's anything that's standing out to you from this initial share, you can point that out as well. Again, my name is Jamari, and a little bit about why I do this work and what brings us to this particular topic is the fact that I went through a pretty severe dark night of the soul. So about 7 or so years ago, or even before that, I was working as a mental health therapist. I was pretty successful and well in my life and my career. I had multiple degrees. I had a wife. I was in my early 20s, and we had already owned a home, and we had the cars and the vacations and the 401k and all of those things that people say that you need in order to live a great life. And I was miserable, absolutely miserable. Even as a mental health therapist, I struggled with suicidal ideation. I struggled in showing up well in my life. And one day, when I finally decided that I was going to take my own life, God intervened. And it's one of maybe 3 times I've heard God's audible voice. And I'm laying and I'm crying on my kitchen floor. And God says to me, "Get up. You know who you are." And so I get up and I go to my altar and I just start to pray. And in my prayer, I say to God, "I can't figure this out. I don't know how to do this life. And if I keep doing it my way, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it here. So, what is the life that you actually have for me? What is the life that you actually called me to? What is the life that my soul chose before I got here?" And I started taking on all these other identities and responsibilities and stories about who I am as a being. And my commitment was, if everything must go, then go. That if I have to release and let go of the house, the cars, the wife, the career, the success, the accolades, in order to truly experience the life that my soul called me to and the love that God had for me, that I was willing to let that go. And those things started to go. And I was just left with me and God. And I spent about a year and a half in meditation and prayer. And prior to this, I grew up pretty traditionally Black Baptist Christian tradition. So I did not have a deep awareness of all the spiritual gifts and capacities that lived in the world. But God started to heal me and reveal to me my gifts to be able to see the souls of others, to be able to support other people's spiritual healing, to be able to connect with the ancestors and bring forward healing across generations. And God started to guide me in what to do with those gifts. And that birthed a life that I couldn't even imagine, and a life today that I couldn't imagine not living. So I went from not imagining how I could live to living this life today where I'm so grateful that I wake up each and every day. And so I say this because for all of those who are here and listening, but particularly to the Black men here, if you are experiencing right now what feels like a dark night of the soul, and we'll talk more about that, but just feels like you are coated and covered in darkness, I know that you are being called higher. I know that you're being called higher to a life that doesn't hurt so much, that isn't so hard. I know that you're being called higher to a life that is meant for you, that you chose before that you came here. And it's truly my honor as the spiritual director of Sons of Spirit to help you to be able to listen for the voice of spirit within you so you can show up to and for that life in a well way. I also want to say to those who are not Black men, but are friends, family, supporters, lovers, clinicians, community leaders, that it's so important for you all to save yourself. You know, none of us make it out of this life alive. I don't know if you all know this, but all of us are going to die at some point. It's like, you know, check your expiration dates. But you ensure that so many of us or we ensure that so many of us are able to live in the meantime. That is the work of community, right? That we are able to live full lives in the meantime. But we're not meant to do that at the expense of the own life we are here to live. So it's very important for you all to be present to your own life and your own healing. I know that many of you are here, maybe even despite your own pain and challenges that you're going through, your own dark night of the soul that you might be going through. And I thank you for that. But even more so, I pray that this offers you not only tools to support Black men as we move through our own healing and awakening, but the ability and the capacity to release the belief and the idea that you must save any Black man in your life. Because you can't. No one can save anybody. Your biggest and all of our biggest contribution to our lives is actually how we tend to ourselves. So save yourself, right? We love, we support, we encourage, we nurture one another, but we do not sacrifice ourselves for one another. Love does not ask that of us. And so I invite you all into a different way of being if your pattern has been to give and give and give and give and show up and show up and show up in any way to your own detriment. Ashe. A couple of things, and I promise y'all we'll get into all this good stuff. Um, this is being recorded, so those of you who are here live, don't feel compelled to take notes. You will get this. And you can, of course, share it with others as well. If you are a Black man on this call or listening and you appreciate this webinar and our time together, Sons of Spirit does offer a membership that starts at only $19 a month, where you can get access to more webinars and more workshops like this one. So be sure to visit our website at sonsofspirit.org. I also will have time set aside for questions at the end. So definitely write down any questions you might have. If your question feels urgent though, like no worries, feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat. I'll try to keep notice of the chat in case there are questions that come up as I'm speaking. And feel free to use the chat for those who are here. If you hear something good that you want to uplift or highlight, drop it in the chat, or something that resonates or stands out for you, please feel free to do that. We know as Black folks, we come from a call and response culture. So even though this is a webinar and I'll be doing most of the talking, it is helpful energy to feel you all in the space. And I already do. So I appreciate you for being here. For those who are watching, if you have questions after the recording, you can always send me an email at it's just info@sonsofspirit.org, and the contact information is also on the website as well. The last thing, if I pause, I'm either listening to Spirit because Spirit runs the show and I say what Spirit tells me to say at the end of the day, or I'm checking my notes because Spirit already told me 5,500 things to say, and I want to make sure I say them all. All right, so be with me and us in the pause as the presence of God. All right, amen. All right, y'all. So, Dark Night of the Soul. What are we talking about here? Um, And welcome if folks have heard other definitions of the dark night of the soul, or what comes to mind, if you want to drop that in the chat as well. Many people, or some people, think when they hear the term dark night of the soul, they think it's kind of woo woo. It's like, okay, what's that woo woo stuff y'all are talking over here? But a lot of the history of the term actually comes from um, early priests and Christian mystics. So, in particular, the 16th century priest, Spanish priest, Saint John of the Cross, or Juan de la Cruz, wrote a long poem or essay, some might say, called The Dark Night of the Soul. And I'll drop in the chat here too. One of my favorite sentences from that, he says, "Now that I no longer desire all, I have it all without desire." Just let that land in your spirit a little bit here. Now that I no longer desire all, I have it all without desire. And welcome if you want to put in the chat even what comes up for you, what's one word on what does this quote mean to you or saying to you about what the dark night of the soul is and is doing in our lives. Now that I no longer desire all, I have it all without desire. The way that the dark night of the soul is spoken to me by spirit and by the ancestors, because all of the work that I do and wisdom that I share in truth does not come from me. I cannot take credit, but is all comes from God and spirit. And the way that they speak to me about what the dark night of the soul is that it is a period in our lives when we have no other choice but to come into the fullness of the love of the divine. We have no other choice but to put down the desires, the identities, the stories that do not reflect who we were designed and destined to be, such that we come into the one desire, the one destiny, the one identity, which is the truth of our soul, the desire for living out the truth of our soul and for the love of God or the divine. Someone also shared in the chat the question Spirit gave me: why are you running so hard after things that will not feel you? Yes. And we're going to talk a little bit even more about how the dark night shows up in our lives, particularly for Black men, as a kind of running after and for the things that don't fill us. Another quote from St. John the Cross about the dark night of the soul says, "No matter how much individuals do through their own efforts, they cannot actively purify themselves enough to be disposed in the least degree for the divine union of the perfection of love. God must take over and purge them in that fire that is dark for them, as we will explain. God must take over." So another way that I think about and Spirit talks to me about what the dark night of the soul is the very common metaphor of being on the potter's wheel. So quite literally, the spirit is being pressed down by spirit, by the spirit, to break down all of these ideas, all of these stories, all of these survival identities about who we think we are and are supposed to be and have been, in order to then form us into our divine shape or beingness. And oftentimes, when we're in this period, we might think there are things that we need to fix. There are things that we need to do because stuff is hard and life feels quite literally depressing, right? But there's actually nothing we can do during the dark night of the soul in order to reshape ourselves. It must be done led by spirit. Someone offered in the chat, when I hear dark night of the soul, it reminds me of going back to source, that triple darkness, like a reset back to the truth of self, like going back to the movements just before creation. Yes, Beautiful. I love that. And so this is right spot on. Y'all so aligned and so attuned. See, I don't even need to do this webinar. Y'all already know. Um, some also say that the dark night of the soul in this way also represents when we are closest to God in spirit, not further away, right? Because source creation is infinite, right? And an infinite being that is actually in truth unknowable, uncontainable, right? And so it's not just supreme light as often as the imagery, but supreme darkness is where we feel the fullness of God of source. So it's also why in so many different traditions, we see prophets go to the cave in order to connect with the divine, right? Go literally put themselves in a state of darkness in order to connect with the divine and to hear the divine clearly. So usually during this period, we do feel isolated. We might feel unmotivated. We might feel like our life is just loss or moving through a storm. We might feel a sense of a loss of identity or form. We might even experience what we think of, in Western medicine as clinical depression. Um, or on the other side, though, of that dark night is actually greater clarity, greater fullness of being, deeper understanding of life, more awareness of your gifts, more power, and a deeper connection to the love of the divine and to the creator. So, the dark night of the soul, though it can be extremely painful and difficult to move through, is often when we are on the edge of our most radical transformation in our lives. And if we can be attuned to that and aware, and if we know how to be present to it, we can support ourselves to make the journey in and through and with that period less difficult and more grounded in ourselves. And it's important to know that the dark night of the soul can start as early, particularly for men and boys, as early as 13 or 14 years old, which is pretty early, right? And it can last 6, 7, 8 years, which is pretty long. And it lasting that long is not ideal, especially if you're lasting that long in a dark night of the soul without support and without awareness of what's happening. Um, but we also have to remember that the many false identities and fake stories about ourselves, the socialization that many of us experience from birth all the way through, teenage years, early adulthood, etc., like all the time we spent denying ourselves and our soul is going to take some time to undo it, right? So for some of us, the fact that it takes 6, 7, 8 years is actually a blessing and a grace, especially if you're 40, 50, 60 years old and you spent 60 years denying your soul beingness, right? Or 60 years, being socialized out of your true nature. The fact that it takes 6 or 7 years in order to move through a purification process of all that is actually a gift, right? But my hope is that through this webinar, that folks are able to have a deeper awareness and consciousness and presence, such that we are minimizing the number of years that someone is spending, that Black men are spending in a dark night of the soul, and we're minimizing the severity of the impact of what that can be like and feel like, especially when we don't know what's happening. Okay. Um, all right. So more specifically, with Black men, because again, this webinar is called Darkest Night of the Soul, and I named it Darkest Night of the Soul and not Dark Night of the Soul, because in my experience, and I've worked with all kinds of people, Um, it's been later in my career that I focused specifically on Black men, but I started out working with everybody and everybody, all genders, all sexual orientations, all races, all ethnicities. But it's my experience that Black men tend to experience some of the most challenging dark nights of the soul, the most challenging to move through, the most challenging to identify that that is what's happening. And I find that there are three main reasons why that is. There are more sub reasons, but the three main reasons that Black men experience some of the most difficult and depressing dark nights of the soul. The first one is the gap between who that man is currently or has been and who they're being called to is significantly large. And it's large due to the historical legacies and forces related to oppression and enslavement, which many Black men are, we're in, literally it's embedded in our bodies and our DNA, right? And when something like enslavement, which is the literal dehumanization of a person, dehumanization, despiritualization, de everything of a person, right? Then who you then become under that historical legacy is going to have some huge gaps between who you are right now and your sacred identity, your soul's identity, the life that God calls you to. And so, specifically for Black men living today, the dark night of the soul can be extremely hard because of that gap being so large around how one is currently living, existing in the world, and who or what God is calling you to. The other thing is the continued impact of the history of enslavement. So, continued oppression, systemic violence, continued trauma, which create additional gaps for many Black men. And then there are wounds of the spirit. So, at a soul level, at the level of soul, there are wounds that, like a physical doctor, a medical doctor can't see, or a therapist can't see, right? Because you need actually someone trained with an eye to see spirit, to see those level of soul wounds that are often connected again to ancestral burdens related to um, our histories of enslavement. So this legacy of enslavement creates so many distortions in spirit for many Black men, um, and becomes the kind of river that we all, when we come into embodiment as Black men, step into, right? So if you can imagine, your soul comes here and desires a specific destiny experience for you, but you come here as a Black man and you step into a stream that's always already been running a very specific course for centuries, right? That leads to trauma, that leads to financial insecurity, that leads to violence that is passed down from colonization and enslavement. And so you then have to fight that stream in order to get out of it, in order to go where you're actually destined to be. And so that makes it challenging, in particular for Black men. And those legacies include, of course, legacies of patriarchy as well, that turn manhood into performances of domination and control and self-denial. So that is one of the key or main reasons why I see um, the dark night of the soul look so difficult for many Black men. And in particular, I do, with the Sons of Spirit membership, I do a workshop called Soul Injury and Soul Anatomy, where we talk even more about how histories of enslavement and as well as other types of spiritual wounds, can show up and be impacting our lives at a soul level, and how we wouldn't be able to we can't identify them without spiritual and ancestral tools to be able to identify them, because they're not something that, like you said, your doctor would see on an x-ray. This is at the level of spirit. Okay. The second main reason why I see Black men experiencing the dark night of the soul so severely, is that supports and resources are low to address this. The amount of resources available specifically designed for Black men around our spiritual awakening is limited, especially if you're not seeking a very like traditional religious spiritual community, which may or may not have the kind of tools to support people in their growth in this kind of way, because a lot of our traditional religious communities are more focused on dogma, and preaching particular doctrine, and not necessarily on the elevation and the healing of people's actual souls and consciousness. And so there's a limited amount of resources. And then, some of the resources that do exist can be pretty white dominated. The spaces that are offering this kind of support to men or people in general. And so, where does one go, right, when they're needing that kind of support? Obviously, again, we have traditional therapists and things like that, but most people, and I know this because I was trained as a therapist, most mental health programs are not training their clinicians in these kinds of spiritual healing and health tools and wisdom. They're being trained in Western white psychology, which was not created with our understanding of Black spirituality and African indigenous practices. That wasn't created with that. It was created with a pathology of the fact that we are broken, right? If something is not right with you, it's because something's not right with you, right? And the only way to address it is if we somehow fix you, right? And so they aren't going to see the dark night of the soul as a precipice for your greatest transformation. They're going to see it as you're broken. Here's this pill. It'll fix you. So, and that's not to their fault. It's the training that is handed out. And so many clinicians don't even know what they're not aware of in terms of our spiritual lives and what might be going on. So, in terms of finding the healing support, there are limited resources. There's a lack of wisdom. We've lost a lot of the indigenous and spiritual wisdom as a collective community to be able to support one another outside of Western interventions. And so, many Black men I know and meet and work with actually sense that something deeper is happening for them, but they don't know where to go with that sense, right? Many, I was a therapist, so I knew what to do. And many go to a therapist and still struggle and don't understand, why am I still struggling, right? Why do I not see any improvement in my life? And that's because there's body level pain, there's mind level pain, and then there's soul level pain. And those things require different interventions. So I see that as that creates darker experiences or more troubled experiences for Black men. The last thing that I see is that willpower as a society, our willpower is low, um, due to a hyper focus on external and material achievements in the material world. So our society is hyper focused on financial gains and material achievements. And some of this is about survival. Like, we all got to eat. I got to pay my rent at the first of the month, like everybody, right? So we all have to, um, invest our time and energy into how will we survive and support ourselves. But some of this is about greed and our misplaced value systems as people. We live in a society that will value what a man provides financially more than whether he is connected to source, more than whether he is present in his body. And then we're surprised when he makes a lot of money but beats his wife. So I always say being a good financial provider does not a good man make. But a good man is connected to source and purpose. And if he is connected to source and purpose, he is connected to the highest provider. So he can't lack what is needed when it is needed. But our hyper focus as a society on material and financial and those stories and narratives that then get fed to Black men in particular has us devalue the greatest connection to the infinite source that would be able to support us in all things, not just financially and in survival. And, I want to be clear that this is not for Black men, this is not really about others' expectations of us. Yes, it would be great if we lived in a world where people didn't expect certain things from you as a man in order to provide financially and be in a certain place. But it isn't personal. The world places value on the material for everybody. It looks different depending on what gender you are, what race you are, whatever. But that is the world that we actually live in, that completely devalues spirit, purpose, character, right? We don't value those things. I mean, look at what the whole system of celebrity is the way that we value people with money and make them the most important people in our world. Why? As opposed to a culture where the most important people in the celebrities are educators, right? So, as men, as Black men, we have to reclaim our willpower and choose to say that who we are, that our own soul is more important than the winds of this material world. And again, we all got to eat, we all got to pay our bills, of course, but it's about your internal value system. And that work, the reclaiming of your willpower, that is your work to do. The world is not going to stop valuing money over people tomorrow. It's not. I wish it could, but it ain't. Okay. The world is not going to stop telling you that you becoming a millionaire is more important than you being a loving human being tomorrow. It's not. So you're going to have to tell yourself that truth. You're going to have to decide for yourself that your value as a man is not defined by what you have and what you achieve, no matter who or how many people say that it is. And it will be a matter of will. It won't be a matter of circumstances. You're not going to be surrounded by 5 million people who say, I love who you are as a person. That's not what it's going to look like. You're going to be up against 5 million messages that say, why don't you have more? Why can't you figure that out? Why won't you do this differently? Why don't you have more zeros in your bank account? Right? And you're going to have to be able to say, that is not the truth of who I am. And that is not the truth of the world that God has defined for me. And this is difficult. Many men struggle with that. So the purification process that is the dark night of the soul becomes this constant battleground with our pursuits for money and success at the expense of our peace and our purpose and our character and our soul's beingness. And these things aren't opposites. We can have both, but the former can't supersede the latter. Did I say that right? I think so. So, so when you're in your life and you're sacrificing your purpose in order to make money, even if you don't know what your purpose is, and you're sacrificing your peace in order to perform the role of a particular type of provider, um, or pursuing a dream of becoming a millionaire, even though the truth is you probably could live fine, off of 80 grand, right? This becomes a battleground for your own heart that you're living. It becomes a battleground for that. And it becomes a place where we lose sight of ourselves in the process. And so this is difficult, it's challenging, it's not an easy thing to do, to reclaim our will in a society like ours about who we are. And so I find, particularly for Black men, who we want to show up well to our lives, we want to meet people's expectations of us, but especially the people who love us. But it can become very challenging. And then the dark night of the soul, who really doesn't give a damn about the fact that you want to be, or your soul that doesn't give a damn about the fact that you want to be a millionaire at the expense of what you're here to do, it can make that experience much more difficult to move through. So the three main reasons that most often see Black men struggling in the dark night of the soul is the gap that's created between who we are and who God intends us to be and where we're at because of historical enslavement and the legacies of that, the lack of supports and resources. Because you need supports in order to move through the dark night of the soul in a well way. And then the fact that our willpower, everybody's, but particularly for Black men, has been co-opted by the material world. And we don't understand the gravity and the importance of reclaiming it back for ourselves. All right. Um, I'll pause for a moment and just see, let me check the chat, make sure there's no questions or any reflections that you want to share into the chat. You can. All right. All right. So how do you know if you or someone else is moving through a dark night of the soul? How do you know? Um, Another reason why the dark night of the soul can be particularly challenging for Black men is because it doesn't always look like what people may expect for it to look like. It isn't always true that I find that Black men experience a dark night of the soul um, um, live in kind of just isolation or sadness or other things you might assume it looks like. A lot of times I will see two extremes, and I do mean extremes. I will see either um, men are severely debilitated, such that in some ways um, their spiritual needs are and struggles are just being written off, oftentimes as like psychosis, right? Or severe mental illness disorders. And these men are sometimes and often some of our most gifted people and souls here. But they've been beaten down so much by society that their souls are like mortally contorted, like trying to live here. So I see that extreme, and that requires all kinds of levels of intervention. Or a lot of times I'll see the other extreme, which is um, men who are moving through a dark night of the soul, but they are actually some of our most seemingly successful people, right? So they're in school, they have a good job, they have a good career. Even if they don't love what they're doing, they care about their community, they're present in their families, even if imperfectly, and these are the men I find who will linger actually in the dark nights of the soul for years and years and years because no one thinks anything is wrong. And so until they oftentimes aren't here anymore, because when you don't have awareness that you're moving through the dark night of the soul and you don't have support, much like myself, folks can become suicidal, right? And you can reach a point where the soul says, all right, we can't figure this stuff out. It's time to go, right? And they will take their own lives. And then everyone's shocked because this person was a pillar of their community. This person seemed to be okay. This person seemed to be excited about their career. This person just started a new business. This person just landed a great account. This person had a beautiful, loving family and children, right? What happened to this Black man? Okay. And so some of the typical signs of like life just being a shit show aren't necessarily what is seen for Black men. But that is a common one. Life is just a shit. So all of a sudden it feels like life is attacking you relentlessly, or you feel super disconnected from your own life, or you feel like you're being isolated, like people are just leaving and turning their back on you, or feeling lost or sad. Um, these are kind of the typical things that we see that can be present. And someone just asked, is it lingering? And I feel like, is it weird that I feel like I'm lingering on both of those examples? No, not at all. Not at all. Extremes like that can, being present to those kinds of extremes means that there's something that in you and your spirit, whether for yourself or for somebody um, who I would say that your body, you have a lot of body awareness. And so when you have a lot of body awareness, you can connect with multiple extremes in that way. Many of us live in our heads, and when we live in our heads, we actually are cutting off much of our consciousness. We think all of our consciousness is in our head. More of your consciousness is actually in the fullness of your body. So I would say the fact that you're lingering on both of those examples is probably something that has to do, and if you want to talk at some other point, has to do with the level of body awareness that you have, so you're tapped into a wider range of your consciousness. Um, again, speaking to the point of like many of our most gifted ones, um, struggle with extremes, and being open and having body awareness consciousness is a deep spiritual gift. But it also can make you really vulnerable during a dark night of the soul. Or just in life, if you're not aware of that. So if you want to talk more about that, um, we can. All right. So typically, so these are the typical examples of what a dark night of the soul looks like. Some examples when I see that of signs working with Black men that aren't typical. The first one is the person speaks vulnerably, and this talks might talk a little bit to what the question that this person just asked here that we talked about. The person speaks doesn't speak in a balanced way about their life, or they're not able to talk about both the blessings or burdens of their life. So if someone it seems to live in extremes or even oscillate between two extremes of, oh my God, my life is broken, everything sucks, right? Or then on the other side, everything's totally fine. There's nothing wrong, right? When someone speaks in that kind of extreme way, as opposed to a more balanced way of like, oh yeah, today was a good day. That meeting was a little rocky, but I'm looking forward to dinner tonight, right? Or, this is kind of a little bit of a difficult season, but I'm really hopeful about this, that, and the third, trying to get some support with this problem, right? If someone's not able to talk in a balanced way about their life, and instead it's like everything is a problem, or you're hearing everything's fine and great and dandy and there's no issues, that's one of the signs I see with Black men that they might be moving through a dark night of the soul. This can also get misinterpreted and misdiagnosed as bipolar disorder. So, and people can have both. They can be moving through a dark night of the soul and be experiencing a mental illness. But I do find that this particular symptom or sign can be misinterpreted that way as a symptom of bipolar disorder. Another sign that I see is men who numb or check out. So spending a lot of time in their room by themselves, that was me. When I was moving through my dark night of the soul, I went from being someone who was more engaged and, out and about to just like literally being in my office in my basement much of the time, playing a lot of video games, which we all do things for entertainment to just like, have a rest or a respite from life. But when someone is playing video games so much that they're just not even present to the world around them, particularly for Black men, it could be a sign that they're moving through a dark night of the soul. Um, Another example, which was we kind of mentioned before, is what I call scrambling. So that's when someone is trying to do anything and everything possible, or that running to make their life work, but nothing's working. It's like your outcomes don't match your efforts, but you're doing it all, and you're just kind of like, okay, why isn't this working? I found that a lot in my life. Again, I had multiple degrees. Um, and at one point during my dark night of the soul, I think I had like 5 different jobs in like 2 years or something like that. Because I was like, nothing seemed to be work. I would get a job and it would suck or something would be wrong. And then I'd scramble to try to figure something else out and make it work. And then that wouldn't work. Then I'd scramble to try to figure out another job and then that wouldn't work. Okay. So that can be a sign, particularly with Black men, of a dark night of the soul. Anger and irritation. Everything bothers you or bothers them. Nothing's good enough. Over exaggerated reactions to small issues. And this, again, I want to note, particularly something like this is about a shift in demeanor. Some people are just assholes. So they get angry and irritated about stuff just because that's who they are. And that's a different kind of spiritual growth that's needed. But if someone has shifted from someone who maybe wasn't particularly an angry person or an irritated person, um, then that's a sign you might be moving through a dark night of the soul. Again, that was a symptom I had. I was not someone who got irritated. I don't even know if I used the word irritated most of my life. But all of a sudden, I was irritated by everything and everybody, and I wanted everybody and everything to go away. So that is a sign. Exhaustion, and I don't just mean physical exhaustion, but again, mind, body, spirit exhaustion. And I don't just mean exhaustion because, you worked a 10-hour shift and then you came back home and you cut the grass. And yeah, you're going to be exhausted if you do that. But more of like a perpetual sense of like, I like where is the energy? Where is it gonna come from to do this life? Okay. And again, from a spiritual perspective, spirit is pressing down on you in order to reform you. And so yeah, you don't have a lot of form, you don't have a lot of motivation, you don't have a lot of energy. But if you don't know that, then it just feels like exhaustion, excuse me, and what's going on. Connected with that is sleep disturbance, trouble staying asleep or falling asleep during my dark night of the soul. I literally, don't ask me y'all why did this when there are actual sleep aids, but I would take Benadryl to go to sleep. Again, don't judge me, y'all. Non-judgment, okay? Listen. I'm in my coma, you in yours. It's okay. Right? But I would literally take Benadryl to go to sleep when I could have took melatonin or something else, right? And I was doing this over and over and over again because I kept waking up in the middle of the night over. And again, the consciousness in the dark night of the soul is trying to awaken. That is literally what's happening, in spirit. And so it's physically manifesting as disturbance in your sleep because you're not aware of it. So in your waking life, you're not working with the process of awakening. So then when you go to sleep, spirit says, wake up, or doesn't allow you to rest in that way. And then the last thing I will say that I see quite often is addictions. And, uh, on a very base level, like when you take all the stuff out of it and all the story, we come into addictions because at the core, there's something we desire that we deeply desire that we're not getting. Like, that is why we fixate on something else. There's something we desire that we're not getting. And often addictions come out of our deepest soul desires. And I know this because I've experienced it myself, right? Where I have, when I finally moved through my dark night of the soul, addictions that I had, apparently I probably had an addiction to Benadryl, but again, don't judge me, y'all. But addictions that I had to like masturbation or sexual addictions, right? Like those things started to on their own dissipate. It wasn't something I had to try to do because the real desire I had for myself, the real desire I had to feel pleasure in my own beingness, right? And in my own life was now being met. And so I really, when I work with men, I really work on taking shame and guilt out of addictions, whatever it is. And sometimes we don't even use the word addiction. Um, Whatever it is, so we can get at the root of what is the desire that is not the fundamental desire in your life that is not being met, that is being met or being superficially met by whatever the addiction might be. But this is another thing that, and addictions can be at anything. And again, sometimes in some spiritual religious spaces there's a hyper focus on certain ones, the sexual ones, the whatever, drugs, whatever, but it can be anything. You can be addicted to playing video games, you can be addicted to a particular relationship, you can be addicted to work, you can be addicted to all, you can be addicted to fitness and working out. I see that a lot with men, right? And where they just work out, work out, work out, work out, work out, work out, there is a core desire in their life that is not being met. Whenever we can't be in balance in something, there is something off balance in our core soul desires. So, those are some of the things that I notice as signs, particularly for Black men. And I know there's some things in the chat. So let me just check this out real quick. Okay. Received, William. And yeah, we can definitely chat some more. Um, Someone says, I was just saying to my partner that I tend to feel a lot of things, but don't know how to contextualize them. So I just don't talk about them. Soul weariness. Yeah. I feel like that's exactly what I've been going through. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then this piece around, I feel a lot of things, but I don't know how to talk about them and contextualize them. That's the perfect setup for what we're about to talk about next. So, what do you do about all of this, right? If we're moving through a dark night of the soul, or someone we know, a Black man we know, is moving through one. What do we do about this? One of the challenges in our society is that we think we have to do it all for things to be addressed. But fundamental to the dark night of the soul is that only spirit, as we talked about, can purify and transform a being. Only spirit can do what the dark night of the soul is doing and move you into radical transformation. We don't even know where you're going, right? Like we don't know who you're becoming fundamentally. So other people and other humans are not going to be able to be the ones that fundamentally guide and lead you through a dark night of the soul, right? And again, the dark night of the soul is calling you higher into truth. It's stripping you and calling you higher. You are becoming someone you have never been before. You have never seen before. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is educate, which you all are doing for yourselves right now, and you'll share the recording to educate others, right? Because many people don't even know, they've never even heard the phrase dark night of the soul. Again, they don't, it's not something they're going to teach in most schools. It's not something most therapists know about or are going to talk about. And so it's important that people have frameworks, different frameworks, and new frameworks, and more empowering frameworks, and more spiritually and ancestrally grounded frameworks to understand what is happening to us, right? If we diagnose the problem wrong in the first place, there's no way for the treatment to work. Okay. So these frameworks and understanding the dark night of the soul helps us to understand better what might be going on with someone in our lives. Okay. The next thing that's important is what I call presence. So if you're moving through a dark night of the soul, consciously choosing to come into the presence of source. I would wake up every day and take a walk with God. And whatever God told me to do, I would just do it. But the main thing was I would wake up every day and just take a walk with God every day. And so I recommend at least 30 minutes in the presence of source, whatever source means to you. I don't care what it means, whatever that means to you. And I don't mean not reading scripture or doing a whole bunch of doing, just being present. And it isn't about achieving anything. And again, ain't nothing that you can do. You are on the potter's wheel. You a piece of clay. What you finna do? Nothing. Okay? So it's not about achieving anything. Sit with source. Sit with God. I don't care if y'all sit there and play dominoes and kiki. Like, but don't be trying to like achieve stuff. Okay? At least 30 minutes a day. I recommend for anyone who first comes to me and they're moving through a dark night of the soul. That is base. That in and of itself will start to radically transform and to heal you. Only source, the source of your life, can tell you what your life needs to look like. That's it. Nobody else can answer those questions for you. Not your mama, not your daddy, not your pastor. Only source can answer. So you must be connected to source in order to experience that purification and receive those answers. Um, if you're supporting a Black man who's moving through a dark night of the soul, it's the same thing. One of your most powerful things you can do is just offer your presence. I had a woman who came to me about her husband who was moving through a dark night of the soul. And she was like, every time I try to ask him how he's doing, what's going on, he just gets pissed, he gets irritated, he doesn't want to talk, all of this stuff. I don't know what to do. I don't want him to think I'm alone, etc. Which was really beautiful that she was coming to ask those questions. And one of the things I said to her was, listen, this man is trying to hear from spirit, even if he doesn't know it, his soul knows it, right? So everything you say is just noise and it's not personal or about you, it's just noise. He also might not have anything to say to you because, again, he's trying to talk to spirit. There isn't anything to say to you. So that might be also the experience of like, I'm feeling things, but I don't know what to say. Sometimes we don't have language. Sometimes we don't have words. Sometimes we don't have, but sometimes it's because you're not meant to say anything to somebody. You're meant to say something to spirit. You're meant to listen to spirit. And as Black men, particularly as masculine beings, there's a way in which how spirit flows through us first is through, I'll talk about it as knowing, right? So with feminine energy, spirit flows first through the body and then comes to knowing. For masculine energy, spirit flows first through knowing and then comes through the body. So as a man, you must first come to know something before you can embody it. And so if you don't know yet, you can't speak to it. If you don't know who you are, you can't be it. Okay? So presence is important if you're supporting a Black man. And that presence can even be instead of when he walks in the house and you hit him with 50, 11 questions, just give him a hug and sit on the couch with him for 20 minutes. You know, be an embodiment of light and of God's source. Just be that presence. Allow that space, right? Imagine that spirit is also in the room with the two of you. Clinicians can do this, right? And a man might come in and not have any words. Imagine spirit is sitting in the room and spirit is talking to him. So you don't have to say anything. You just need to be present for the conversation that's already happening. Okay. Um, The other thing that's really important is prayer. So prayer is a portal and it aligns our spirit with the will of God. It aligns our spirit with the will of God. Um, Begin praying every day if you're moving through a dark night of the soul. And I have a prayer book that is out. It's called Water for the Soul. And it's 41 days of prayer, specifically for men who are moving through, Black men who are moving through a dark night of the soul. It's also for folks who are in the lives of a Black man. So each day has a prayer that's spoken like from the heart of a Black man and a prayer that's spoken for him or over him. So you can quite literally, with a partner, you both can have a prayer book. You can read the prayer spoken for you that day. They can read the prayer that's spoken over you for that day. Okay, but prayer is so important. And some may say, I've been praying, right? I've been praying this whole time. But pray, I always ask, praying for what? Praying for your circumstances to change, praying for your soul to heal, because those are two different things, right? Praying for more money or praying for less of all that stuff that keeps you from being who you are, because those are two different things, right? If you're in the dark night of the soul is trying to align with the will of God. And the will of God wants first and foremost for you to heal. Wants first and foremost for you to let go of all that stuff that isn't who you are. And then the kingdom of heaven will come, the money, the change in circumstances, etc. But first and foremost, God wants your spirit. Spirit wants your spirit. And so you have to pray about that, not about the circumstances to change. Because you also in the dark night of the soul, so they're not just going to change like that. Okay. So prayer is really important. And I'm going to actually put in the chat a link to the prayer book for those who would like to get it. Um, and again, prayer for those who are supporting a Black man is really, really critical. Praying for them, again, can be more important than trying to have a conversation, definitely more valuable than trying to fix their problems and address all the issues that might be going on in their lives. And prayer can be embodied. Prayer is not always spoken. You can pray as you're making someone a meal, and you can pray into a meal the medicine for the soul that that person needs in their life. You can pray, prayer can be how you have sex. I mean, I'm not saying go out and have sex as a prayer, but if you're gonna have sex anyway, it might as well be a spiritual healing experience. Okay, so so every prayer can be embodied. And when you're supporting somebody, how you interact with them can be prayer, right? Can be an opening to source. And so as you're supporting folks, you can think about that. Even for clinicians, write a prayer for all your Black male clients, or if you're a coach, write a prayer for all your Black male clients that you keep in your space, or find a rock or a flower or something that for you represents their movement and transformation out of the dark night, and allow that to be a prayer in your space, right? That can change the energy of the room. I always like to say the best prayers breathe. They live, they have existence, they create energy in the room. All right, the next thing that's important is what I call power, or another better word for it is surrender. We're taught that power comes from control, but true power comes from surrender to source. And even right now, think about what is one thing in your life you can practice surrender with. You can practice not assuming you're right about it, not assuming you know what to do, not assuming you can fix it, not assuming you know what's going on, but that you're just going to go to God with it, right? It could be your marriage, it could be your job, it could be your business, it could be your children, it could be your relationship, it can be your mother, it can be your finances. But I encourage any Black man going through a dark night of the soul, pick one thing that you're going to wake up every day and put on God's altar and not move it, not touch it, not fiddle with it, not try to fix it, unless you hear definitively God's voice clearly speaking for you to do something. Definitively. And most of us know when we definitively hear God's voice and when we making shit up. So, um, Picking one thing that you will surrender. I surrendered everything. I said, if everything must go, then go. That was my mantra. I would not necessarily recommend it to everybody. I tend to be a little bit extra with mine, but pick one thing that you are going to surrender, and what will be your mantra for it, right? Well, how will you speak over the fact that you are giving this now to God and you're not going to try to fix it anymore? This is a space where, as someone who is supporting someone moving through a dark night of the soul, well, that person who's being a support will also learn surrender too, because you can't touch it either, right? You've got to leave it alone, and you might get with a partner and say, okay, what are we going to surrender together? And we're just going to leave it alone. And you can't help him to surrender. He has to choose to surrender. You can't make him surrender ultimately to God. Surrender is a free conscious choice that we make. So it's really nothing for you to do if you're supporting somebody in surrender. And that's the point. So the last thing that I will offer, and then we'll take some questions, is what I call perfecting. And perfecting, the process of perfecting isn't about being perfect, but it's about God shaping us perfectly into who Spirit calls us to be, right? Which are imperfect beings, but it's your kind of imperfect, the exact kind of imperfect that God wants you to be. This process requires support, okay, as you're moving through the dark night of the soul. So, I always like to say, if you're a Black man moving through the dark night of the soul, you need a team. You need a care team. God would bring people into my life who supported my journey, supported my evolution, supported my growth, supported my healing. Yours might be your therapist, especially if they're spiritually attuned. It might be a spiritual leader in your community or an elder in your community. But it's important that you have wise counsel and wise care. If you become a Sons of Spirit member right now, for founding members, you get 5 free one-on-ones with me, as well as these workshops. And so I can support you as well as the community. And this is really important. If someone came up to you, and let's say they've never played a day of football in their life, and they came up to you and said, I'm going to go to the NFL, and I don't need a coach, I don't need a trainer, I don't need nothing. You probably wouldn't even laugh, because you would just walk away and be like, okay, this person has lost it, right? But many of us as men think that we can become the best version of ourselves internally, a version of ourselves we've never seen before without any support. We just gonna figure it out all on our own. That's like saying I'm gonna go to the NFL, having never played a game, with no coach, no training, no nothing, right? It doesn't work like that. If the game of football does not work like that, you coming into the fullness of your soul's knowing, purpose, calling for your life is not going to work like that. And a part of why it doesn't work like that is because God does not call you to this life alone. You are not meant to do this alone. You deserve to have support as you move through this. You deserve to have somebody who you can call when it's challenging. You deserve to have somebody who will speak life and motivation into you. You deserve to have somebody who can help you steer the ship in a different direction when you lose it. You deserve to have all of that. Why do you have to be the only one who's walking around in the world by themselves? Okay. So you must have a care team and a support. And I don't put a number on how big it needs to be or whatever, but and spirit will often guide you. If you're doing your 30 days of presence with spirit will guide you to the right people. But you must have a care team. And if you're somebody supporting someone, a Black man who's moving through a dark night of a soul, as a supporter, you can be on his care team. But you got to understand, you aren't the doctor. You not the doctor. Spirit is the doctor. Source is the doctor. So you not fixing, sewing, cutting, clean. That's not your role, right? But you can be someone who is present, who cares, who is invested, um, and it has to be a clear choice. You have to want to be on, and I want to stress this so much. You have to want to be on a man's care team because you want to be on it, not out of obligation, not from a place of resentment, not because you hoping, well, if I help you, then you gonna help me. It cannot be a transaction. You have to fully desire, freely desire to be a part of his team. And if you don't fully desire, freely desire to be a part of his team, do him the biggest, greatest blessing you will ever give him in his life and leave him alone. Leave him alone. Let him be with God and let God support his life, because your resentment, your anger, your sense of obligation is not going to support his growth. And many might be saying, I want to be that person on their care team, but if I'm being honest, Jamari, I do got resentments. I've been holding this brother down forever. I do have a sense of obligation. I grew up with all this responsibility. And I would say, then get the support that you need to work through that. Prioritize you so that you can show up the way that you desire for him. And I have a friend, her name is Shonda, and she works a lot, particularly with women, but she works with everybody. And I'll put her website is called Kinetic Surrender. She is the person I would send for people who really struggle to focus on themselves and care for themselves so that they can show up well in relationship with others. So I would recommend doing that work. But because being on someone's care team is not about control, fixing, it's about holding the space for the transformation of this person's spirit and holding the space for spirit can come and do that work in their lives. And you have to be a fully willing participant. And I absolutely will add these links with the video as well. Okay. Um, all right. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll take some questions if there are any, um, is sometimes a dark night of the soul isn't like a singular experience, like a continuous singular experience. Especially if you are someone who um, evolves and grows, especially as you evolve and grow, you become more malleable and available to God in your purest form, right? So, spirit and God will then sometimes place you on the potter's wheel more often, actually, because your current, not because your current form needs growth or improvement or transformation, but because I like to say you are now creator's favorite, and you're the most abundant or most available medium. Again, if we think of creator as an artist, right? You become an available, malleable medium that spirit can trust to continue to grow and to evolve to the highest states of being. You know, we see this with some of what we think of in our history as like our most enlightened ones, like Buddha or Jesus, right? These were beings that continue to evolve even after death, right? That's what we see with Jesus's resurrection, is that even in death, God didn't stop putting Jesus on the potter's wheel to transform, just continue to transform. And so it stops feeling quite like a dark night of the soul because there's so much light present, but the light present is you. The light present is you. It's not coming from the world. It's not because you got this little night light that you're trying to, the light that is then present in any dark night of the soul, in any cave, in the dark nights of the souls of other people and other men is you. When you're willing and you're able to be available in that way to spirit. So um, let me just check in as I check in to make sure Spirit doesn't have anything else for me to say. If there are any more questions, definitely put in the chat or you can come off um, mute. Spirit wants me to stress that you don't have to be afraid if you feel like this is where you're at in your life. There's no need to be afraid. Um, yes, there are aspects of it that will definitely be uncomfortable and hard and challenging. Um, but this is not here to hurt you or to harm you in any way. And there is so much support and love for you. The fact that you're even here is God's love for you, because there are 5 million other men who are not here, and may never see this video, right? And so um, you don't have to be afraid. Your vulnerability is welcome. The support and love is here for you. You can reach out to me at any point, but more importantly, you can reach out to Spirit and God will respond. God will absolutely respond. And you can have the life that you absolutely desire. I never believed I could have the life that I live now. If you had asked me 7 years ago, I would have said, where, who, not Jamari, but you can absolutely have a life where you feel like you, where you value you, where you know who you are, where you walk your own path that isn't defined by other people and by society, and where you're loved in it. Because sometimes we don't choose that path because we think, if I walk that path, who will go with me? If I walk that path, who will love me? Will I ever find a partner? Will I ever find, friends? Will I ever have a community? You absolutely will. And you'll have the best of partners, the best of friends, the best of communities, because they will be the ones that your soul chose for you before you even got here. Okay. So we're here for you. Um, and we love you, and you do not have to be afraid of the darkness. The darkness is here to usher you into your light and to allow you to support yourself, and to ultimately support others in walking into their light as well. Okay, beautiful. If there aren't any questions, comments, um, I'll invite everybody just to take a breath and take another one. I've shared a lot in this webinar. There's no need to try to understand all of it with the mind. What is meant to be known and understood is felt by the consciousness. And so just be with it. And again, it's recorded. So if you just be with it, and then later you want to go back and re-listen to something, to hear it differently, you can do that. There's a question of, what was it like moving through the dark night of the soul for you? Um, at first, um, it was it was hard. I had no idea what was happening to me. I knew that I was in pain. I knew that the tools that I had in terms of therapy and all of those things, were not helping. Um, I knew I could not figure it out, but I didn't have enough awareness to know what was going on for me. So, at its worst, um, I was disassociated actually. I would be in meetings and could I would be like hovering over my own body. I would be that numb at its worst. Um, and so it was really bad. And I am grateful for the testimony that I have, which was God's intervention, and God coming to me and reminding me that I do know who I am. And then my soul giving me this pathway, right, where I could come to presence and come to prayer and come to power and allow the perfecting, which is still the dark night of the soul. It's about being in it differently, to where there was more light. And as I was in that process, you know, every day felt lighter. Every day I um, felt something heal, felt something fall away, came to a new awareness, came to a new understanding. Every single day was a little bit more. Um, and so that's why I say the dark night of the soul doesn't have to be this horrible dragging yourself through the mud kind of experience, though it often starts out that way. But there are these tools and things that we can do that help us to usher ourselves through it and out of it so that we can get to the other side. And it still can be challenging, but you have the support of spirit. So yeah, absolutely. It was absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. So, all right, beautiful people. If you'd like to put into the chat to close us out, maybe just one word that's present for you or a phrase or something you're taking away, that would be great. Just to allow you all um some of the last words here. Thoughtful. Thank you. Connection. Beautiful. Illumination. I love it. And my word is grateful. So thoughtful, connection, illumination, and grateful. I thank you all. I will send out this video probably. It'll be in the email that goes out Sunday or Monday. It will include all of the links and probably a couple more. Thank you to all of you who are here live. Thank you to those who are watching the recording after. I just leave you all with just this blessing um, for all of you who are moving through pain, that you experience the divine power of your own light working in your life to transform you. I leave for those of you who are supporting those who are in pain, that you too come to your own sense of comfort and knowing about the value of your life, even beyond service to others, and that we all collectively are able to lift each other up as one and wake each other up together. For anybody who wants to continue to connect with me, uh, one of the best ways would be to join the membership just because you get great access, but you also can schedule one-on-ones with me. And again, all of that information is on the website sonsofspirit.org. And I'll include that information as well in the email that I sent out. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, my brothers. Thank you, all those in the recording. Sending you all with great love and peace. Bye.